Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Furniture Forensics. It's the series where I take old pieces of handmade furniture and analyze the wood choices, the joinery, the tool marks, and try to figure out who made this piece, and when, and even why. And today, I have got my work cut out for me. I'm in Connecticut, I'm house sitting for my brother, and we're going to be looking at his amazing corner cabinet. Now, this piece looks like it's just built into the house, but it's not. It has nothing to do with this house. My brother owns an auto garage, and one of his customers was actually getting ready to throw this thing away. And my brother said, you know what? Don't do that. I will be right back with a truck, and I'm going to put that in my house. And he and his wife put it in place over here, and I think everybody was kind of stunned by how beautifully it fit in and the utility that it has. Let's talk about corner cabinets just for a second. This was a common piece of furniture, especially in the mid to late 1800s, when houses were much smaller, but people were starting to have more possessions, especially things like china and glasses. A corner cupboard like this allowed people to use the space in their house much more efficiently. Corners are often a waste of space, but if you build a neatly fitted cupboard into the corner, you can store a lot of stuff without taking up a lot of floor space. So these were very valuable at a certain time. And this example is, well, I'm going to be honest, it's a head scratcher. If we look at joinery and wood choices, this piece is straight up country carpentry, my favorite style. The woods are hilarious. This piece has pine, poplar, maple, sycamore, walnut, and some other woods that I'm not totally sure about. It was absolutely scrapped together with whatever this guy had laying around. He just made it work. I think we've all been there. Now, the joinery is exactly what I love to see from this sort of utilitarian furniture. It's just as good as it needs to be to keep the piece lasting a long time, but nothing is extra fancy. It's utilitarian the whole way through. A good example is this central rail right here. Now, this is holding almost the whole piece together, and where a lot of the piece is nailed, this rail has been very neatly mortise and tenoned into these wide, upright stiles with very clean, very sturdy joinery. That's going to keep the whole thing together. Now, the shelves could have been installed in a more complicated way, but they've actually just been nailed right through the face with plain old nails. And I think when it was originally built, the nail heads were even allowed to show through. This wasn't super fancy, high-class furniture. This was furniture that was built to look nice, to represent the home, but it wasn't pretentious. It wasn't overly fancy. I doubt it was for a client. I bet somebody made this for their own home. The piece shows an excellent sense of design and proportion. It's got a generous top section that's open for display. You might want to put fancy plates or pewter up here. The bottom has a more closed-off storage section for things that you don't want to show off. And then there's the central rail that we already talked about with a very nicely proportioned drawer set right in the middle. You might have used this for your fine silver back in the day. My brother's family uses it for random junk, which is what my family would do too. The construction is basic on the whole. It's a triangular box, mostly made out of pine tongue and groove, and then all the woods on the face are the random hardwoods we talked about before. Now, everywhere he could get away with it, the builder just nailed straight through the rails and stiles of the face onto the shelves to give it a structure. This might seem almost lazy, but the piece has held together for a long time. It's still very solid, so there's nothing wrong with nailed construction. Now, up on top here, he's added a lovely cornice, just a couple pieces of molding that keeps this thing from just being a plain, ugly box and gives it way more class. This large piece of crown molding here might have been made by the craftsman himself, or it might have been purchased. Moldings like this have been commercially available for a really long time. But the part I can say for sure was homemade was the little piece of accent molding underneath. Here's a small strip of walnut with a bead detail cut into the top, and it's pretty irregular. If I had to guess, I would say he used a homemade scratch stock for this, and a very thin piece of walnut that was then just tacked on underneath. This is an excellent use of contrasting woods, along with a small bead detail that gives us a nice transition between the big lip on the lower edge of the crown molding and the flat of this top rail. Adding this piece of walnut tied the whole thing together really well. This was probably a craftsman who was working in less than ideal circumstances with leftover wood on a small budget, but he included those little details that make the piece so much better than it has to be. To really appreciate the craftsmanship of this piece, we need to get into these doors because they are just wonderful. These are classic frame and panel doors, like you would have seen in some of the nicest furniture. The wood is maybe a little bit thicker than you would see in high-class cabinet work, but everything from the joinery to the finishing has been beautifully executed. The drawers are almost entirely made of yellow pine. There might be some sycamore down here at the bottom, and the panels are also yellow pine, a single piece that's been planed down fairly thin. Now, the joinery on these is hardcore mortise and tenon joinery that's even been drawboard together. And by this end grain here, I think these are pegs made of riven oak. So this guy was making furniture in the legit old style. This was 100% built to last. These panels are very nice. They have a good thickness, a good proportion, with a wide field and a narrow center raised section. And the way that they're cut is really nice. I think whoever made these might have owned a panel raising plane or a badger plane. Those are good too. It could have been a wide moving Philister plane, but this actually looks like a dedicated panel raiser. That would have been a surprising tool for somebody like this to own. Now the components are fairly wide and chunky, and that caused the craftsman to make some particular decisions when he cut the joints. What I find really interesting is the tenon has actually been carried all the way through this super wide style. And this confused me for a long time. It would be so easy to get away with a little stub tenon, inch and a quarter maybe, right here. That would have been plenty. You still could have drawboard it and everything. Why did he go through so much effort to carry these tenons all the way through? Well, it's the same reason there's a haunch on this tenon here. By carrying this tenon all the way through, this piece of wood is continuous all the way through the top of the door, and it holds these wide stiles flat. And of course, there's a groove plowed all the way around with a plow plane. We've got a whole video on those if you're not familiar with them. And the plow plane iron must have been exactly the same size as the mortise chisel, so everything could fit together like a puzzle. The panels are just floating in a groove. They're not glued in. The haunch tenons, the tenons carried all the way through, the drawbores, the proportions, everything allows these doors to move seasonally without binding in their openings, without twisting or racking. And here we are, God knows how many years later, with a flat, beautiful door that still works perfectly. If I have to pick one part of this piece to be my favorite, it is definitely this drawer. First off, it's beautifully proportioned. It sits really nicely inside the central rail. But more important is the wood choice. It is an incredibly figured piece of walnut, almost quilted with a beautiful three-dimensional grain pattern. You just know that this was that scrap. You know because you've got one, that one tiny scrap of wood that's so beautiful you will never burn it or throw it away, but it's so small it's very hard to use in a project. And you are hoarding it for years, waiting for just that time when you can use it. And he did it! He did it! He found the place where he could use that one seemingly useless scrap, and it is gorgeous. But really, we need to open this drawer up. And when we do open it, that is when things are going to get wild. Now, I've brought this drawer outside so we can see it in the light and get the best possible view in the sun. The first thing that I notice is that the components are very thick. The drawer front is almost a full inch, and the sides and the back are 3/4 of an inch. You would expect much more delicate components in a drawer, usually to keep it light. This is country carpentry, and it's what you get sometimes. Now, where the sides join the front, you would expect a half-lap dovetail, and that is exactly what I have. One enormous half-lap dovetail. It's beautifully executed. I cannot fault the craftsmanship. The layout lines are super crisp. There are no gaps anywhere. It fits so tightly, but it's also been nailed. It's been nailed right through the tail into the front of the drawer, which is something that you see sometimes, but it's still a little bit of a surprise. Now, of course, the bottom is going to be sitting in a groove that goes along these three pieces, especially in the side. Most craftsmen are very careful with their dovetails to keep that groove from showing on the side, but this guy did not care one bit. Here's the drawer bottom groove right there, and it is right in the side of the wood. He didn't try to hide it by sticking a pin there or anything. It is on full display. And the bottom is, well, it's pretty interesting. Here is a single, very large piece of sycamore that was either hand-sawn or more likely cut on a bandsaw mill because it has these parallel saw marks back here. It's a fairly thick piece of wood, and it has been very roughly beveled with a foreplane all along these three edges, so it can slide in from the back into its groove and provide a nice bottom for this drawer. It's nicely done, and sycamore is a good choice for this. Good hardwood, not particularly heavy, and the work is very neat. These corners have nice 45-degree lines, even though nobody's ever going to see them. And you can see the craftsman did the bare minimum planing necessary. He planed just this part so it wouldn't interfere with the runners on the sides, and in the back, where no one was ever going to see it, he left it alone. This piece also does show some signs of possibly being reused. There's a screw hole right here where there's no reason to have one. The bottom is pinned in place with a single tack, but that's back here. Here, well, there's no reason for a screw hole there. So most likely this piece of wood was something else, and then it got repurposed. Now, at the back of the drawer, and this is really interesting, you would expect to find through dovetails. They were typically the quickest and sturdiest way to go, but that's not what's happened here. You can see this corner has been rabbited, and he did a good job, nice clean rabbet, and then just nailed from both sides. Nailed in here, and then nailed in from the back. A perfectly acceptable way to make a drawer. Let me give you a better view. Nailed and nailed. So we would expect this on the other corner, right? Except that is not at all what we have. Instead, on this corner, for whatever reason, we get a butt joint. The two pieces of wood were stuck together, nailed through the back, and that is it. Drawer done, stick it in, get this thing delivered. This is honestly one of the coolest drawers I think I've ever looked at in the time I've been doing furniture forensics. It has some elements that are crude. There's no getting around it. But the parts that matter, the parts that you can see, look beautiful. And whatever shortcomings it has in the design, this is a great drawer. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, this piece has everything I love about country furniture. It's got a blend of being utilitarian and stylish. It was careful, but it was also quick. It's utilitarian, but it's also pretty, and it's got all those little details I love to see when a rural artisan plies their trade. It's got visible layout lines, like where the shelves join the top rails. It's got those big dovetails that we talked about. He had some breakout when he plowed the grooves in the door stiles. And that breakout could have been a huge problem, but no sweat. He just flipped them around and put the broken parts on the inside. I would have done it too. It's got all the details of somebody who is making work either for his own family or to make money and to do it efficiently, to do it quickly and get paid. Now, a piece like this, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in Connecticut. This is much more associated with Ohio, where I live now. And here's the funny part. This piece is from Ohio. Like I said, this is one of my brother's customers, and they said it was made around Columbus, which makes perfect sense. Pine, sycamore, walnut, the style of the construction, the fact that I've seen so many of these around Cleveland. One of my best friends has one of these in her house. So Ohio makes way more sense. But the other thing he told me that doesn't make any sense was that this was made in the 1950s. And that is blowing my mind. That it doesn't make any sense. This is made as if it was made in the 1870s, 1880s, at the latest, 1950s. There's never been a power tool anywhere near this thing. I don't know that that's not true because I'm not an expert in dating furniture. So maybe it was made that late by somebody who was just an old timer, really trained in the old ways of doing things. And he didn't need all that newfangled crap. He knew how to build a piece of furniture, and he did. He really knew how to build a piece of furniture. And the evidence on it is so hard to parse. I understand the building techniques, and the building techniques are old. But then there's the hardware, much more modern. But it also looks replaced. The latch on the door, definitely replaced. This knob over here, almost certainly replaced. I can see the shadow from where the old one was. The wood is, well, the age is tough to figure out because it's been refinished. Maybe more than once. Somebody's come through this thing with putty. Most of the nails have been puttied over. This panel down here split in the weather at some point, and somebody slathered the wood putty right on there. I probably would have done it too. People have busy lives to lead. But when you look at things like the nails, the story gets incredibly jumbled. There are at least 4 different styles of nail on this thing. Some of them are square, maybe cut, maybe forged, but I doubt it. Then there are more modern machine-made looking nails. There are skinny nails. There are obvious round wire nails. I think the most likely thing is the piece is older and somebody restored it in the 1950s. That makes the most sense to me. But my brother says he's going to put me in touch with the owners and I can find out more about it. So if I do find out more about it, I'm going to jump into the video and I'm going to put that extra information right here. Right here. Okay, nothing happened. So I obviously didn't get any more information. But just this thing, just the way it is, has been incredibly fun to look at. I didn't even get to tell you all of the details. Like, there used to be doors here on the front. I can see where the hinge holes were filled in. And as I was just looking at the drawer, I figured out the bottom isn't a single piece. A little strip was just nailed onto the back. And the fact that it was nailed on suggests that it was the pre-wood glue era, which especially suggests not the 1950s. The evidence keeps mounting, but looking at it has been amazing. I've loved every second of it. Big shout out to my brother and his family who very graciously allowed me to take a look at this thing. It's been a huge blast. I've wanted to look at it for years, and I'm going to try and keep bringing you guys more furniture forensics videos. If you want to see more stuff like this, longer videos, you want to see videos early and behind the scenes stuff, sign up to become a patron. Patreon.com/RexKruger. Patrons get everything early and a whole lot of other extras. You get a lot for just $5 a month. And this is an unsponsored channel where I don't have to read ads or talk about tools that somebody sent me. I just get to do the stuff that we're actually here to see. My patrons make that possible. I appreciate them so much, and I appreciate my viewers. Thanks for joining me on this furniture forensics. It has been a trip. We'll see you next time.